Welcome into the Action Network podcast. This is your UFC 272 betting preview. Brendan Glasheen with Action Network senior writer Sean Zerillo, former professional MMA fighter and MMA analyst Billy Ward, back this week for UFC 272. It's at T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. We had some news come in early in the week that was going to affect this coming weekend, and now that we've sorted all that out, odds of course, available wherever you may please, getting set for what should be another great weekend in the fighting world. Let's start with this. Of course, the main event. Colby Covington is the favorite against Jorge Masvidal. Sean, your thoughts on the main event this weekend?
This fight is going to be won or lost up against the cage. I think it plays out very similarly if Covington wins to the first fight between Usman and Masvidal. Usman secured 5 takedowns in that fight. I believe he shot 16 times, had 16 minutes of control time. Largely that was up against the cage. Masvidal, the striker here, to Covington being the wrestler. Covington, good volume, good pace, pressure, durability. I mean, he'll pour it on you for 5 rounds. So even if these two just turn out to end up in a kickboxing match because they want to punch it out, I do think Jorge has a chance on power optics, but Colby should have more volume over the course of 25 minutes. And he's obviously going to have the grappling upside here as well, which is what makes him a minus 350 favorite. Never would lay that type of price on him because he's not a finisher. So I'm going to look to the prop market. His minus 110, minus 105, up to minus 120 decision line is interesting. I would make that closer to minus 130. But you can find a fight to go the distance prop at minus 122 at FanDuel. And just looking at the math, I don't want to get too crazy in terms of nerding out over the math here, but this is the type of stuff that if you're going to bet sports, you need to look for in terms of betting theory. What is the book telling you? Forget my projections. What is the book telling you? Minus 122 to go to a decision. Okay. Colby minus 105 by decision. That's about 52%. Masvidal plus 1200 by decision. It's about 7.5%. So they're telling you this fight should go to a decision about 60% of the time, should be about minus 150. That's not even accounting for the VIG. So this line should probably be closer to about minus 175. Jorge probably has more finishing upside inside the distance, bigger puncher, but Colby, as I said, is very durable. Maybe Colby gets him out of there late, just rinses and repeats with the takedowns, puts the pressure on him. Woodley popped a rib blade against them. That fight was probably going to a decision. I think both of their finishing upside may be a little bit overrated here. So the fight could go to a decision, minus 122 at FanDuel. It looks like a terrific bet to me. I think Jorge denies the early takedowns, keeps Colby off of him early, and then Colby eventually starts to get them in the later rounds and pours on the pressure. So I think Billy and I have pretty similar views on how this fight plays out, but I'm curious to see how he's playing it and how he'd use these guys for DFS.
Yeah, Billy, I'm fascinated by the Masvidal takedown defense angle and how you might want to approach this main event. How would you approach it? Maybe a little differently than Sean would.
I'm pretty lockstep with Sean. I think it's pretty likely to go to a decision. But with that being 5 rounds and the output on these guys, that means it's pretty viable even for GPPs that both these guys end up in the optimal lineup. Jorge's only 6,800. So depending on how the rest of the card plays out, he can score enough points to justify 6,800. And, you know, Colby's output is just insane. His striking, his takedowns. So basically anytime he's not fighting Kamaru Usman, you want him in your lineups. It's pretty much that simple with him. I'm seeing 75% takedown defense from Jorge, which is about right. I think Colby's able to get him down eventually. I don't know if it's so easy right off the bat. So the only betting angle I have on that, if Jorge defends a couple in the early rounds and looks good and that line moves a little bit, I'd consider betting Covington live if it gets closer to even money on him.
Yeah, I agree with that Covington live angle, especially after the first round. Masvidal took a scorecard against Usman in both of those fights. So that line is probably going to tighten after the first round if Covington can't get him down right away. Minus 250 on Covington, minus 200. Those would be good prices to target after the first round. Maybe even after the second round, though. I would expect you probably get the first best price after round 1.
Sean, as a follow-up question. Well, go ahead, Billy.
I was just going to say, with Covington's cardio is a lot easier to trust than Masvidal. We've seen Covington win fights that go 5 rounds. Jorge's only wins in 5-round fights ended in the second and third round. We've never seen him in the fourth and fifth. So ideally, we've got Jorge leading after 2 or 3, and we can get even closer to even. But Sean's probably right in that the safest would be to go Colby after round 1.
Sean, as a follow-up question to live betting MMA, we didn't get into this much last week, and we're here every Friday, by the way, for the UFC betting previews on the Action Network podcast. what is the biggest piece of advice when you want to live bet a fight? Because I don't think we discussed that much last week.
Yeah, cardio is the biggest weapon in MMA. The more fights you watch, the more you realize that having a skill advantage doesn't matter if you're gasping for air and backing up. So generally speaking, fighters who have higher finishing upside tend to go a little bit crazy earlier in fights. They tend to gas out later in fights. And when they're matching up against a fighter who has proven cardio and can sustain for 15 minutes, in this case, 25 minutes, you look to bet against them after round one. Once their win condition has largely passed and that fighter is out of the most danger. So it's really just about betting on cardio, finding cardio advantages and looking to weaponize that. Maybe even just waiting for a better price once a fighter is out of the round where their opponent is going to be the most dangerous.
Let's move on to our favorite underdog bets. Of course, we want to find some angles. As we discussed in the main event, you want to find some angles to best capitalize on what the book is offering. Sean, what stands out to you as a favorite underdog bet?
Yeah, one underdog I'm betting, not going to be my favorite just because he's only a slight underdog and it's about to pick him, is Nico Negumereanu. Like his inside the distance odds at plus 300 as well. But my favorite underdog in that plus 170 to plus 300 range, that would be Tim Elliott. And I really like this guy as a money line play. I like his decision prop at plus 450. Tagir Ulanbekov just hasn't really impressed me so far in the UFC. He doesn't really do much. He can take you down, but he lays on top. He almost lost a fight with top control last time out just because the guy on bottom was being so active from guard and kept hitting him over and over, while Ulanbekov just largely laid on top. Tim Elliott, probably the better striker, really awkward movement, creates awkward angles, good volume. He'll kick your leg over and over. So I expect Elliott to probably win minutes on the feet. And I'm not necessarily sure that Ulanbekov is the better grappler if this fight hits the mat. I think Elliott might be able to reverse him. I think Elliott might even be able to take him down. My one concern with Elliott is going to be his cardio in the third round of this fight. He is getting up there in age. He's a bit old for a flyweight, but this guy has fought the best of the best in the world at 125. Excellent strength of schedule. I think he's probably a pretty solid underdog bet at anything over plus 175, but you can get plus 200 in the marketplace. So Tim Elliott, Elliott by decision are my favorite underdog plays for this weekend.
He's 205, as you mentioned, on FanDuel. Tim Elliott. You can also find him at plus 200 on DraftKings and BetMGM. Billy, how about yourself? Your favorite underdog bet for the weekend?
Yeah, I'm going with Michal Oleksiejczuk against Dustin Jacoby. I think he's 170 now. He was 180 when I first looked at this one, which means we're on the right side of it. But Jacoby is the more decorated striker. He's got kickboxing and boxing experience, but Oleksiejczuk just has a lot more power. So when we got two guys who are mostly going to stand and trade, the guy with the power, he only has to win for about 2 seconds to fight. He lands that shot, he wins, it's over. Jacoby has to win the whole fight. He has to continue to win because if he gets his lights put out, it doesn't matter how good he looked before that. And then additionally, both of Oleksiejczuk's UFC losses are by submission, and Jacoby doesn't really have a lot of interest in making it a grappling match. So I'm not so worried about that. I think, if there is any grappling, Oleksiejczuk probably has a slight advantage. I don't know that we see that. For those of us betting on him, I'm hoping we get some grappling there. And then obviously that also makes Oleksiejczuk a great DFS play. I think he's 7,600. So if he can get a knockout for that, we're going to want to have exposure to him there too.
Yeah, I bet his inside the distance odds at plus 300. I think that's a solid prop too. It just probably ties up most of his win condition. He's 4-0, I believe, on decisions for his career. But if he's landing, I think he has a good chance of putting Jacoby down. And he's very good at finding the chin in the pocket.
Yeah, I'm really hoping we get a little bit of grappling out of him just to make him steal a round or two there. He could get touched a lot more, but then if he gets a takedown at the end, a lot of times the judges look favorably on that. So I'm hoping it's not just stand up, but I'm with you if it is.
Olin, Shakeoff, by the way, is like you said, he's 7,600 on DraftKings, and he's averaging just over 70 DK fantasy points per fight this year. Let's move on to our fight of the night. We have Bryce Michal at minus 165. Those are the lines brought to you by BetMGM. Taking on Edson Barboza. He is at plus 135. First off, Sean, why is this a fight, and Billy, please, you as well, why is this a fight that stands out to each of you that you'd like to highlight this week? It's, of course, not the main event, but it's a fight that each of you are particularly passionate about.
Yeah, I think the stylistic nature of it is so polarizing. Michal, a very strong grappler, tons of top pressure. We haven't really seen Barboza face a non-kickboxer in a while. Barboza, by far the better kickboxer, one of the best in the sport. Very dangerous. And I think he can even catch Michal coming in. Michal goes to shoot for a single leg. Barboza lifts the knee, could catch him under the chin. Barboza has multiple ways of winning this fight. Michal, I believe, unless he gets a quick submission, it's probably going to be a pretty ugly, sloppy decision win, unless he's just hanging on to Barboza for 3 rounds. So I'm curious to see if Barboza can get up early. If he can get up early, can he keep getting up if Michal comes back and takes him down? Because that guy just clings on to you. He seems very annoying to fight against. Has the undefeated record. Do you think that's overinflating him a little bit? Hasn't fought in a while, but doesn't necessarily train with the top camp. So I don't really know what kinds of improvements that he's making. But it's a tough stylistic matchup for Barboza. Always going to be interested in plus money. I think there is value on him at plus money. But again, I prefer his inside the distance odds at plus 300. I believe that line is available at DraftKings. If he's winning enough minutes on the feet to win this fight in space, I expect that he's eventually going to find a way to knock Michal out. So plus 300 on Barboza inside the distance. Money line, probably fair value too. But I believe maybe a live bet after round 1 if Michal can't take him down, if it's obvious that Barboza is going to be able to get up over and over and Mitchell's top pressure isn't really working. But listen, if Michal goes in there and submits him right away, I don't think I'm necessarily going to be shocked either. This kid's grappling is pretty special. We just haven't really seen him get put in trouble on the feet. And I think this is the fight where it's going to happen.
Billy, you have similar thoughts on Barboza?
Yeah, I'm riding with him, as is usually the case with Sean and I. I'm taking the safer route and just betting his money line. I could see him, outpointing him and Michal being tough enough to survive. The big thing I'm looking to see, though, is whether Barboza can get back to the feet once it does hit the ground. His takedown defense is solid at 78% through his UFC career, but he's probably going to get taken down at least once or twice in this fight. If he can get back up, that's what I'm looking for in terms of the live betting and stuff like that. But it's a huge step up in competition for Michal. He's never really fought someone as seasoned as Barboza. And I like the veteran. I like the guy who we've seen do it at a high level before. So I'm going with Barboza.
He should also be bigger. He's going to have a 4-inch reach advantage. I mean, he used to fight at lightweight, so he is the bigger guy. It's just a matter of whether Mitchell's pressure is going to be too much for him. I mean, the guy just he's like a leech. He just grips on you and he doesn't let go until you're on the ground. But if Barboza can shuck him off, especially in the bigger cage, I think the bigger cage certainly plays to Edson's advantage here.
Yeah, Barboza, as the guys mentioned, plus money, 2-2 and 4 efforts as a featherweight this year. But yeah, I mean, I think his hands, based on what I've read up on and caught up on from watching, his hands are really doing well for him as of late, as he heads into this fight at 22 and 10 overall. We cannot have this episode or this podcast without discussing prop bets, because that is a fun way to get involved if you don't feel strongly about one side or the other in these particular fights on the main card. It's always a nice idea to go to a prop bet. Billy, we'll go to you first here on the prop bets. Who do you like in the prop market?
Yeah, I'm betting Sergey Spivak to win by submission. I think it's right around plus 300. He's fighting Greg Hardy, and, we'd all love to see Greg Hardy get knocked out again, but I don't think that's really how Spivak's going to play this one. The fight is minus 225 to end before a decision. So most of that is obviously going to be on the Spivak side because he's a pretty big favorite. But he has 0 standing knockdowns in his UFC career. His only KO win was on the ground against Jared Vanderaa. I don't think Hardy has the capabilities to put him away standing. He hasn't looked good striking. He's been knocked out a couple times lately. So I think eventually Spivak's just experience and his skill advantage will allow him to get it to the ground and he'll find a submission. Hardy doesn't seem to have very good cardio. I'd expect it to come late. If you want to get real crazy, bet it round 2, round 3. But I'm happy with the plus 300 I'm getting just to win by submission at any point.
How about you,
Sean?
I
kind of like that. My only concern is just that Spivak gets on top of him and starts ground and pounding him until Hardy just, sort of turtles up and doesn't fight back and it gets stopped. So that's why I generally lean to the inside the distance props. That submission line, that knockout line are the same price. Like you said, probably higher upside because his win condition is going to come on the ground for the submission prop. I bet that fight to inside the distance or under 2.5 rounds, minus 175 at DraftKings. I think those are the approaches I would take just because Spivak's a bad striker. I could see Hardy putting him down early. My favorite prop is going to be Kevin Holland by submission at plus 850. This line should be closer to plus 500, in my opinion. I have about a quarter of a unit, 0.2 units on that bet. Nothing crazy, but what you do with bets like this and how I tend to play props like this every weekend, you mix them up in little round robins. So I mentioned Oleksiejczuk inside the distance, Barboza inside the distance, Tim Elliott by decision. You throw Holland by submission in there. You've got a 2 plus 300, it's a plus 450 and a plus 850. mix them up in a little round robin. You could get a very nice payout from those for pretty small stakes. So it's a fun way to play it. But to me, Alex Oliveira has about 7 minutes of gas in him. And when that starts to run out, he looks to give up his neck and find a way out of there. Doesn't typically get knocked out, but he seems to give up his neck and find a way to get submitted. So I think Holland snatches up a guillotine at some point here and puts him away in the second round. Plus 850 by submission, I think is a pretty solid bet, considering Holland's BJJ, but more considering how Oliveira looks for a way out once he starts to tire.
Yeah, and he struggled, Oliveira, lately. He's 2-6 over his last 8 fights, and the 2 victories were not all that encouraging as far as how he looks coming into the weekend. So definitely Holland is someone who is trending up, but definitely, again, folks, a way to get involved with the fights. You might see the heavy favorite and think stay away, but prop bets available to find unique ways to get in on the particular fighter you might be passionate about.
First fight at welterweight for Holland, I should mention too, moving down from 185. He never really pushed the middleweight limit. It seemed like he never cut weight. So definitely an interesting angle to watch. He could be absolutely massive at the welterweight division.
Okay, there you go. Another nugget that helps make the case. Billy, your time to shine here, pal. We're moving on to DFS strategy, and I'm curious as to how you look at the board, look at the salaries, and how do you start a lineup this week in DFS?
Yeah, obviously the most important thing we have going this week is there's 2 different 5-round fights. So we've got the late edition of Renato Moicano against RDA. So both those guys are exceedingly cheap. We've got 7,200 and 7,300, I believe, is their salary. So they're adding up to 14,500 instead of the usual 16,200. For cash games, you're just going to plug both those guys in. You could also plug in both Colby and Jorge. I'm comfortable just going Colby on that one because we don't really need to save the salary. But it gets interesting for GPPs because I looked at the last 4 events that we had multiple 5-round fights. One of those, both fighters in one of the fights and then the winner of the other both made the optimal lineup. So 3 of your 6 lineup members came from those 2 fights. I think that's really in play with the co-main event here. You know, if it's pretty likely to go 5 rounds, that means we can get a lot of action out of those guys. And they're just so cheap that makes it easy. Sean, do you have an opinion on who you're more interested in from a DFS standpoint in the co-main?
Yeah, it's going to be Dos Anjos for me. I'll get into it in a minute, but this guy has been competing in 5-round fights largely since 2015. It's been to the 4th round 8 times over that span. First 5-round fight for Moicano. So I think just in terms of the stylistic nature of how their experience has played out, RDA shrink the schedule. At that price point, it's all RDA for me, certainly.
And they found out they were going head-to-head Tuesday. That was some of the news from earlier in the week that they agreed, Moicano and Anjos, that they would agree to a 5-round fight, Billy.
Yeah, just to expand on that a little bit, when DraftKings releases their salary Sunday or Monday, usually, that salary is locked in. So when we get an opponent shift like that, Dos Anjos went from a fairly heavy underdog to now he's a favorite. So we're basically paying, long shot odds to get a somewhat heavy favorite in that. So he's going to be super popular. I think the way to get contrarian or unique with that is to pair him with his opponent, not to avoid him altogether.
I like that. That's huge because, like you said, I mean, that analysis, folks, that's just going to jump out to people, right? Like, how do you avoid the chalk? I don't think many people would think like that, to just go ahead and roster the guy he's facing. And just as a reminder as well, you'll find in the DraftKings contest that Rafael Fiziev is out. We found out Monday, COVID-19 positive test. So of course, do not roster him. That is a no-no at $8,900. So yes, to Billy's point, the salaries won't update. The fighters will also not leave the contest, even if they are ruled out. Any other angles you'd like to share, Billy, in terms of daily fantasy, cash games, or GPPs?
Yeah, from a GPP standpoint, I'm looking real hard at the Jalen Turner versus Jamie Malarkey fight. The salaries are pretty close in this one, so I can really see it going either way. But I've got this one at -200 to be finished inside the distance. So with those guys at 8,000 to 8,200, if either of them gets a stoppage, you almost certainly have to have them in your lineup to win anything big. I think Turner's the better striker, where we've seen Malarkey rack up a lot of takedowns in some of his fights, but he's a good striker too. He's got a couple knockouts on his record. So I don't have a strong take on who's going to win that fight, but I'm pretty confident that the winner is going to be in the best lineups come the close of contest Saturday night.
Yeah, that's an absolutely ridiculous fight. Final prelim, I believe. It should just be really fun. Turner's very aggressive in round one. Malarkey's durability is probably going to be what swings the result. If he's able to weather that storm early, I think he takes over in rounds 2 and 3, maybe a live betting opportunity. But I think he can actually rack up about 10 minutes of volume and then get Turner out of there late, or I think Turner's going to get a round 1 finish. So I actually have the over 1.5 rounds in that fight. I expect it to be pretty competitive. Malarkey's to survive, maybe get it to the later stages, but I could see a late round 2 finish as well for either of them. But yeah, I think either or in pretty much all of my DFS lineups. I think a finish is probably coming in the second or third round.
So, Billy, it feels fair to say better to take a more balanced approach from a salary standpoint. Like, any interest in Nurmagomedov? He's at minus 800, of course, in his fight head-to-head with Kelleher. It was plus 550. But Nurmagomedov is at $9,600. He's the most expensive. So maybe this is a week where you could fade the most expensive guy and get some value with those in-between salaries.
Yeah, for GPPs in particular, I think he's going to be extremely popular just because we are getting so much savings in the main event. But I'm probably going to mix in one of either him or Holland or Ulanbekov in a lot of my lineups just because those guys have such long odds. Sean's talked me off Ulanbekov a little bit with his Tim Elliott pick earlier. But you've got room to play, 2 of those expensive guys, one guy in the middle, and then with all the savings at the co-main event. But Colby
Ulanbekov just doesn't do anything. He just lays there. He's a lay and pray guy. Like, it's not the type of guy you want to use in DFS lineup. He's not going to finish you, and he's really not going to rack up a ton of control time either. He's either going to lay on top or get pushed off. So,
I mean, that can be okay as long as Elliott gets back to his feet. So that's what you got to look at. If Elliott keeps getting back to his feet and he lands 7-8 takedowns, those points add up quick. I don't think that's the most likeliest case. I think you're right in that the likely scenario is that he kind of gets stuck there and not a lot happens. And that's a lot of salary to pay off if you're not getting a ton of takedowns.
All right, before we wrap things up, we have to get to our best bets for UFC 272. Sean, you first.
Yeah, we just mentioned the fight, but I'm going to take Rafael dos Anjos minus 175. I have this line projected closer to minus 250. If this was a 3-round fight, I think I'd be considering Moicano at this price. But over the course of 5 rounds, I want RDA all day. This guy has maybe the best strength of schedule in UFC history. Look at the names he's fought. He's fought anybody who matters at 155, former welterweight, Moicano, a former featherweight. So I think Dos Anjos could be the bigger man in the cage. That said, let's put a pause on this. I think Moicano actually has some early success here, and you might even be able to live bet RDA after round 1, round 2. Moicano, the faster hands, actually has a bit of a length advantage, and the grappling should sort of neutralize each other out when both of these guys are fully rested. But after about 10 minutes, I think Moicano is going to start to dip. Guy basically flew 24 hours consecutively. He got to Brazil, got the notice that he was going to fight, got right back on a plane and came back to the States. He's been flying nonstop, has to cut weight for the second time in 2 weeks. Dos Anjos better volume over the course of 5 rounds. And I think he will start to be able to grapple RDA, or he should be able to grapple Moicano in the late stages as well. So RDA to me, minus 175. I think that's a pretty good price for a 5-round fight against a guy who is more than proven over the course of 25 minutes and somebody doing it for the first time.
It's hard to avoid those airplane cookies and snacks they hand out too. So hopefully for his sake, he did that. How about you, Billy, your best bet?
Yeah, I'm going with Ľudovít Klein at plus 140. He was fighting at featherweight before this fight in the UFC. I think this line would probably be closer to a pick'em, but people are baking in that he's coming up a weight class to fight Devonte Smith. But if you look at his record, his only win in the UFC was a 150-pound catchweight. He fought at lightweight primarily before he got to the UFC. I don't see that being much of an issue. So I'm okay with him on that side. But, he's lost both of his last 2 fights. Smith has lost 2 of his last 3, but his only win was against Justin James, who lost like 5 fights in a row and was cut. So that wasn't, a super impressive win. I think this should be about a pick'em, but we're getting plus 140 at Klein. So I'm going to take the value on that one.
Cosign.
Love it. Love it. All right. I think that's it, fellas. Great stuff as always. And looking forward to an excellent weekend in Las Vegas. Excellent Saturday. Should be good. All right. Well, be sure to join us, folks. Every Friday, we will break down the UFC fight that is to be had on Saturday. And this was your UFC 272 betting preview for Sean Zerillo and Billy Ward. Find their great work over on the Action Network. Brendan Glasheen, again, be sure to check us out every Friday for UFC betting previews. Thanks for tuning in to the Action Network podcast. We will catch you next time.